All right. We are going to go ahead and get started. So if anyone else is kind of walking around, go ahead and start moving towards your seat. And yeah, thank you all for coming to our event, What's Up with Men? Is There a Masculine Genius? We're super excited about it. The schedule, so the event is a little bit different from past Edge events because it's a joint event with the Siena Symposium, which will be kind of explaining how that came about. But first, the schedule is we're going to try to wrap up by about 8 o'clock. We're going to hear from Dr. Savage, and Dr. Deavel is going to be responding to her presentation. And then you guys will also have a chance for some questions. And then we'll also hear from one of the young women just at the end of the night to kind of wrap things up. So with that, let's actually start with a prayer. Yeah. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, and deliver us from evil. Awesome. So now I'd like to invite up Dr. Lemons to say a little bit about the Siena Symposium and what they do. So please welcome her up.
Well, thanks, Joe. I must say the Siena Symposium is very glad to be here tonight. We are very interested in the question of masculine genius, and there's a couple of reasons for that I want to share with you tonight. The first, of course, is that the Siena Symposium is an interdisciplinary group affiliated both with the Center for Catholic Studies and the St. Paul Seminary School of Divinity. And the second reason, of course, is that it's part of our mission to explore questions like this. Our mission is to, with the light of faith, try to establish through research and education what St. John Paul II calls the civilization of love. Now, the civilization of love requires at least two things. First, it requires women to use their feminine genius. And what that means is simply to use their ability to recognize that other individuals, other human beings are persons deserving of love. And then to work to assure the ethical treatment of human beings wherever they are, at home, in the workplace, and in our culture at large. Now, the other thing is, of course, that in order to do that, pursue the ethical requirements of treating human beings is to pursue loving them. Now, we know through faith and also through natural law that it is the only ethical way to treat a human being is love. St. John Paul II, in his work called Love and Responsibility, argues this point, and he calls the obligation to treat others with love the personalistic norm. The second thing that the civilization of love requires is collaboration between men and women. Men and women have different gifts, and they need to bring those gifts to bear on trying to figure out how we can structure all the institutions of society in order to protect human dignity. So we need collaboration. It's very, very important. And so I'd like to invite all of you, men and women, to join the Siena Symposium. Didn't expect that, but yes, we would be delighted for you to join. If you have questions, you can get the card that's on the back tables. It explains a little bit more about the Siena Symposium. It lists board members. Our board members are from the law school, from business, from the humanities, the seminary, all places. You can just email them or talk to them. They'll be very glad to talk to you about it. You can talk to Dr. Savage and I. We're the co-directors after the event tonight if you want to. If you want to get on our email list, you can shoot me an email, rmlemons@stthomas.edu, or Dr. Savage, pdsavage at stthomas.edu. We'll get you on the email list. I think you might want to do that. We do have some very interesting events coming up, one of which we're very excited about, and that's we're getting a new website. IRT is hard at work at it, so we'll send out an email when that is actually coming online. And we have Professor Janet Smith coming in the spring. She's going to be delivering a talk, and she's going to be the recipient of our Siena Symposium Humanitarian Leadership Award, April 16th at 7:30. All right, stay tuned. There will be more information coming. Now, finally, what I would like to do is say that the Siena Symposium is very glad to be co-sponsoring this event. And on the behalf of the Siena Symposium, I really want to thank Joseph O'Sullivan and all the people at the Catholic Edge for working so hard to organize this wonderful event. I also would like to thank Relevant Radio and everyone else who gave us some free publicity. Those acts of kindness really keep Siena Symposium alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lemons. So just to some of our folks that are visiting from the Siena Symposium with us tonight, just a word about who the Catholic Studies interns are and what we do. So we are a group of 40 juniors and seniors that undergo a year-long leadership training seminar. And then we also think it's important to just be hands-on as well. And so each semester we put on 3 Edge nights. And yeah, that's what we do. So, and here we are. Yeah, so when we were planning back in September what we wanted to do, the topic of masculinity came up, and we thought it was something that's actually become really pressing in recent years. So right away, we all really wanted to do it, and everybody was on board. And we actually heard that there was a professor at SPS who had written a paper on the theory of the masculine genius. So I went over there to kind of pick her brain and hear what she had to say about it. And it turns out that she was someone that is a co-founder of the Siena Symposium. So she suggested that we make it a joint event, and here we are 3 months later, excited about talking about masculinity. So yeah. Also, we were eager to hear what students on campus had to say about masculinity. So we put together a little video for you guys to watch, and if you want to direct your attention over here, you can check it out.
First of all, some type of athletic ability, like muscular, I don't know, like predominance over women's ability and technique.
Men can hold their emotions in better. I don't know if that's a gift or not.
There's just sort of the physique of man is just, just more athletic, just a bigger build, I guess to say. And
men are very good at protecting their family and keeping their loved ones safe.
Patience is definitely one of our gifts.
One of the biggest characteristics of men is we try to fix everything. I think we're stubborn in that way, in that we think that we can fix everything ourselves without the help of anyone else.
They tend to be more, leaders, have leadership, and like to be more almost in control in a way.
See, I don't know, because I'm not trying to be stereotypical about it, but it's, I guess you'd say usually would be kind of like the strength and like providing safety for others and things like that.
I'm not sure. I mean, I don't want to just use the cop-out answer and say that they're born with it, but I think it's definitely something in our creation or how we were created versus women that gives us those gifts or gives us that thought process, that more rational thinking, gives us that physical strength.
I mean, I guess just for, generations and generations, men have that's kind of been their role in society, is to be that caretaker. So I think that's something that, you know, boys start learning really young, that, you know, that's going to be their kind of their job almost. I mean, that makes it sound negative, which isn't true, but like that's going to be their role kind of, is to like care for others and to like be a provider.
I guess for one, it's a stereotype, and second, I guess that's just like how like men in my life have been. It's been like a provide safety for me.
It's just kind of brought it, like how we're brought up. Like if a little girl cries, they kind of like soothe them. If a little boy cries, like stop crying, you know, you're too old for this.
I think it's something both that we're born with and also that we're raised to believe.
Well, like I said, I think it integrates with the women's approach, and I think that's just, and that applies to just how they grow intellectually and spiritually.
All right, so lots of interesting stuff. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Savage. So Deborah Savage is a member of the faculty at the St. Paul Seminary School of Divinity at the University of St. Thomas here on campus. She teaches philosophy and theology and also serves as the director of the Master's in Pastoral Ministry program. She received her doctorate in religious studies from Marquette University in 2005, and her degree is both in theology and philosophy. She is the co-founder of the Siena Symposium, an interdisciplinary think tank at UST, organized to respond to John Paul II's call for a new and explicitly Christian feminism. Her paper, The Nature of Woman in Relation to Man, Genesis 1 and 2, through the lens of the metaphysical anthropology of St. Thomas Aquinas, will be published this winter in Logos. Also in 2015, the theory she will be presenting this evening will be published as The Genius of Man, in a collection of essays entitled Thinking with Pope Francis, Catholic Women Reflect on Complementarity, Feminism, and the Church. Before her decision to pursue a doctorate, Deborah actually worked for over 25 years in the business sector, holding a variety of positions primarily in manufacturing organizations. So she has a broad range of experience, and we're excited to have her tonight. So please welcome up Dr. Savage.
Hi. Hi. Okay. Thank you, Joseph. So, thank you so much. 1 second. Okay, well, I want to start by saying that it's really an honor for me to have been invited to share my thinking on this topic here tonight. And again, even though Dr. Lemons already did this, I really do want to say thank you to Joseph and the rest of the Catholic Ed students for organizing this, to Dr. Michael Naughton for supporting it, and my colleague and co-director in the Siena Symposium, Mary, Dr. Lemons, for all her work over the last 14 years to sustain the symposium and help bring us to this possibility. No matter what happens tonight, no matter what you think of my theory, the amazing thing is that we're all here talking about it, don't you think? As I thought about the symposium collaborating with something called the Catholic Edge, I suddenly realized that actually the symposium is rather edgy too. We always seem to be talking about things that push the envelope a bit or maybe a lot. Now, some of you don't know about this, but we're always making trouble, which is one reason why it's safer over on the other side in some ways. Let's see. We often provide a public forum for declaring things that we all know must be said if we're to have any hope of recovering our culture. And so maybe it is okay to point out that after all, we are named after someone who could be said to be one of the edgiest women in history, St. Catherine of Siena. So it's a good marriage here, though we will let you all keep the name, as tempting as it is to try to fit it into ours. So I think there might be some people here who heard about this event through the Argument Club for Women network, or maybe the Argument of the Month Club for Men, and that's about as edgy as you can get. And so I want to be really clear right away, and I hope it won't disappoint you. We are not going to be getting quite that edgy tonight. This will not be a debate. That people that go to those events are used to a debate. Because, of course, the answer to the question, is there a masculine genius, is clearly yes, in case you were wondering. It would be a strange evening if we just came and said there isn't one. Though it seems we no longer have a very clear idea of what it is, and perhaps we never did, I hope to help us articulate at least a starting point for a deeper consideration of that reality. We all know that John Paul II focused on an exploration of the feminine genius, and some might say seems to have left out an account of the masculine. But that doesn't mean that one does not exist. No one scholar can do everything, and we all understand, I think, why he concentrated on lifting up women in the way that he did. In any case, as I will explain, the account of the masculine genius I would like to propose to you tonight certainly finds its initial inspiration in the work of John Paul II. And I probably should admit right from the start that at a certain point I did ask myself how I thought me, a woman, could really write or speak about this. And I was thinking about it, and then I realized, well, John Paul II wrote about me. He's a guy, so to speak. I mean, he is. And so, you know, I mean, he had the audacity, so I guess I can. And in any case, Dietrich von Hildebrand says in one of his books that men will always be able to see more clearly into women and women more clearly into men. And anyway, let's just try to picture what might happen if a group of men went public with the claim that they possess some kind of genius. At least in some of the circles I'm aware of, that would not fly too well. And in any case, I have been secretly praying to John Paul II since well before his canonization, so I'm pretty confident that we have his blessing. There are so many things that need to be said about this in the something less than an hour that I have. I was working on this paper like a dog, trying to fit 5 years of research into a 50-minute or so presentation, so we'll see how that works. And it's a bit of a challenge since my theory has several moving parts and quite a few of them have to be in place if I am to establish my claims concerning the nature of the masculine genius and persuade you that my theory has accounted for everything. So I will only have a moment to point to some of the reasons why this question should be of urgent concern to all of us. It seems clear, does it not, that in the West, relationships between men and women are characterized by profound confusion and even disorder. In the United States in particular, the so-called feminist movement that marked the latter half of the 20th century, and though let me pause here and state unequivocally, it actually made significant and necessary contributions to an equally urgent cause, while certainly not solely responsible for the situation, has unquestionably left men and boys in a quandary about who they are and what is expected of them. Dr. Meg Meeker, author of Boys Should Be Boys, states that, quote, "You cannot have a revolution without casualties, and in the feminist revolution, the casualties were boys." Consider the following facts. Compared to girls, boys are less likely to graduate from high school, less likely to go to college, more likely to be diagnosed with a learning disability. Boys are more likely to attempt suicide, use illegal substances, and engage in risky sexual behavior. Their struggle is due in part to attempts by mostly well-intended persons to help girls get ahead, not a bad thing in itself, but one that has led educators to change the way they teach in the classroom and to establish school schedules that favor female learning. This is documented. But by far the biggest factor is the absence of men from young boys' lives. Half of all boys grow up without a father in the home. Half, 50% of all boys grow up without a father in the home. They have fewer male teachers and fewer real heroes. And the problem involves more than boys. It includes the very presence and value placed on fathers. More than 30 million children in the United States do not have a father living with them. 90% of all runaway and homeless children are from fatherless homes, as are more than 71% of high school dropouts. Poverty, or a fatherless home, is now a predictor of poverty. It's not just correlated with poverty, it's a predictor of it. If there's no father in their home, you can pretty much predict that that will be a poor family. Some of the students echoed that thought, right? At least 85% of all youths in prison grew up in fatherless homes. And while we're on that subject, it has been widely documented that though the U.S. has but 5% of the world's population, it houses 25% of the world's prisoners. But perhaps the most important point is that, as the Bureau of Criminal Justice reports, the male incarceration rate is 15 times that of the female. We live at a time when boys are told over and over that men are responsible for all the evils in the world. So many of our great national heroes have been deconstructed or discredited, and boys now have few real-life and historical male role models to provide them with the vision of what it means to be a man. In the absence of such models, they turn elsewhere and open themselves up to misdirection from male peers, gang leaders, and worse. The data indicate that fathers and men in general are disinvesting in family structures and the persons within them, even though evidence shows that such involvement actually provides men with a way toward real perfection and happiness. Whatever you end up concluding about my proposal, it seems pretty darn clear that we need one. The situation requires that we recognize that humanity urgently needs a deeper understanding of the genius of men. The second element I will only have a moment to point to is what the science tells us about the differences between men and women. As the divinely revealed Word of God, Scripture does not need support from science to demonstrate its truth claims. But as God is the author of all truth, it should not surprise us if we discover that all along Scripture has contained the secret that scientists are just now discovering. At least that is what I will want to argue. Now, we need to acknowledge that there are people out there, even on this very campus, who will take issue with the view that man and woman differ in meaningful ways. In some circles, such views are considered unscholarly, maybe even ridiculous, or at a minimum politically incorrect. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that this is the case. Sure, our bodies appear to be different, but even the body cannot be said to have anything to do with one's identity. Such thinking, it is said, risks equating our bodily existence with who we are as persons and leads, of necessity, to biological determinism. Such thinking, it is said, is merely a vestige of the persistent stereotypes that are a result of the historical patriarchal structures with us to this day, all aimed at keeping women in their place and men in power, or something like that. That was sort of a joke, but not a very funny. You got to listen for the jokes because they go by really fast. Well, I would welcome a chance to discuss these issues with those who hold to that point of view, but for now, let's be very clear about one thing in particular. Researchers report that boys and girls exhibit male and female personality traits from the day they are born. There was one young man who said, or a couple people I think said, that it's sort of, you learn this. No, listen for a second. It is on the record that there are scientists of both sexes who began their research secure in the conviction that they would demonstrate that these traits are a result of socialization. They had to change their tune when the data revealed it to be otherwise. There were scientists who became parents, who began to raise their children, and determined to avoid any hint of the dreaded stereotyping, set it up completely differently. I guess that means no pink blankets, no blue blankets, I don't know, no ribbons, no tiny football jerseys, trucks for the girls, dollies for the boys. But in the end, they were forced to admit that male newborns behave like boys and female newborns behave like girls right from the start. Guess what? Female babies are judged to be more sensitive, the males to be stronger. Here are just a few examples of what has been scientifically demonstrated, a list that does not even include more recent discoveries in neuroscience and brain research. Baby girls look at faces. Baby boys look at objects. A little girl will look at your face while you watch them, or you're with them at the crib. The little boy will look at the mobile above his head. 3-day-old girls maintain eye contact with a silent adult twice as long as boys. Girls will look even longer if the adult talks. It makes no difference to the boys. It always gets a laugh, and we're going to come back to that. In contrast to one-day-old male babies, one-day-old baby girls respond to the sound of human distress. They can already distinguish an infant's cry from other noise. Boys cannot. 4-month-old girls recognize people they know from photographs, not the boys. When new toys are introduced into a nursery school, the boys drop what they are doing and go see. The girls do the same when new children arrive. No matter what you give a boy to play with, he will make a truck or a sword out of it. Little girls will wrap almost anything in a blanket and carry it around like a baby. And by the way, the same evidence shows up across cultures and throughout generations. Girls show more interest in babies. Boys are more interested in other things. One wonders how much money they spent discovering what everyone else has known all along. When I told my mom, a mother of 6, all about this, what she said was, why didn't they just call me? I could have told them. I could have used that money, she said. So we're just about ready to converge on something here. We're going to start into the actual meat of this subject. And so it's a good time to remind us all that when we are speaking about human beings, we are ultimately before a great mystery. The mystery of what it means to be human, created both male and female. And at the heart of the Church's interest in this whole topic is her truly profound question, the one that St. John Paul II pursued for most of his pontificate. Why did God make us male and female? In the eyes of the Church, the question is not whether or not we differ from each other in ways both obvious and mysterious. The question is really, in what does this difference consist? And since it appears to be a part of God's design, to what end? What does it mean for us in the here and now? Though, as you will see, I will argue that man and woman do have particular gifts to bring to the tasks of human living, we need to enter into this discussion very clear about the fact that neither man nor woman can ever be reduced to a function or a role. We will see that these distinctions are much more profound than any mere division of labor or biological function. In fact, the Church teaches that the complementarity, the uniduality that characterizes the nature of man and woman is both physical and ontological, and that as such, it is the very reality that gives us our mission to create not only human families, but human history itself. That's a quote from the Compendium of the Social Teaching of the Church. Complementarity is what gives us our mission to create not only human families, but human history itself. And so let us turn our attention to the main thread we are following here. As I said, we will have to lay some foundations first, and our starting place is John Paul II's account of complementarity in the theology of the body. It is, of course, common knowledge now that John Paul grounds both his theology of the body and his account of complementarity in the first 2 chapters of Genesis. But in the opening pages of the text, the late Holy Father makes a claim that most scholars have overlooked, perhaps because he does not himself completely exploit it. There he argues in a new and intriguing way that we can derive the meaning and nature of man from these two scripture accounts, pointing to the first chapter as the place, just a second. I knew I should have printed this out in larger font. I'm sorry. Okay, as the place where the sacred author is referring to man per se. So the first chapter is the place where the sacred author is referring to man per se. That is, an objective reality created in the image of God. He says that the second account, in contrast, refers to man in the aspect of his subjectivity. That is, as a concretely existing person. In other words, John Paul II is arguing that Genesis 1 reveals the meaning of man in the abstract or objective sense, while Genesis 2 reveals the meaning of man in the concrete subjective sense. And in fact, I have learned, when looking at it through the lens of the metaphysical anthropology of St. Thomas Aquinas, John Paul II is right. Proof of this proposition is unfortunately beyond the scope of our discussion tonight, but permit me to take a moment to mention some of its basic elements. First of all, it is important to note, though we have always thought of the main characters as Adam and Eve, only Eve is ever actually named, and even then, not until after the fall. They are referred to in the first account by the word Adam, which comes from Adamah, or earth. And in the original language, Adam is a reference to man in the collective sense, what the philosophers would now call man per se, or man as such. When at Genesis 1:27 God says, "Let us make man in our image," he does not mean the individual man Adam, the husband of Eve. He means man as such. Human being is made in the image of God. Now, when the sacred author states male and female he created them, what is noteworthy is that the words in the original Hebrew, zakar and nekeva, are not nouns. They are adjectives. And they describe man as such. This does not mean that man per se is created both male and female. It helps if you use the word active and receptive. It means that man as such has the capacity for relationality built right into him. This is just a further specification, really, of the received tradition that man is made in God's image and therefore is, in his very nature, built for relationship. The so what shows up when you consider that what this means is that both man and woman simply must be understood to be absolutely equal, both instantiations of the same substantial form or soul, equally endowed with intellect, same soul. There's not a masculine soul and a female soul. Same soul, human soul, both male and female, equally endowed with intellect, will, and freedom, and characterized by both receptivity and a capacity for action. But while the first creation account establishes that man and woman are equal, the second account reveals what differentiates them. And here we find a very different description of the creation of man and woman. At Genesis 2:22, Eve is made or built, the Jewish word, Hebrew word is banach, out of one of the man's ribs, and both God and the man are finally content that a proper helper has been found. Here the sacred author refers to man and woman as Ish and Isha. These are references to individual and concretely existing persons. Adam is fashioned from Adamah, from the earth. Eve is made from Adam's rib, Tselah, and a different word is used to describe her coming into being. She is built from Adam's rib. So these two accounts taken together reveal that the complementarity that characterizes the nature as such has now been embodied in two concretely existing beings differentiated by two distinct but related kinds of matter. And in the thought of Aquinas, gender is described as a type of accident. That's a philosophical term meaning something that inheres in a substance and cannot be understood apart from it. But gender, in his account, is an inseparable accident or a proper accident, that is, one that cannot be separated from the composite of body and soul. So gender is not an accident like blue eyes or red hair. These are accidents merely of the matter. Gender is attributable to the totality of the composite. It is a feature of the person. Man, as such, is a composite substance made of body and soul. Both man and woman must be seen to be distinct instantiations of the species, made as they are of different matter and animated by souls that are commensurated or adapted to their individual person. This is the word that Aquinas uses. It's in the Summa Contra Gentiles. If you want to look it up, commensuration meaning that the soul and the body are interpenetrate each other and equal parts of the person. So at a certain point, the soul takes on the features of a female person, and the male soul, or not the male soul, but the soul, the human soul, takes on the features of a male soul, but it doesn't start out that way by any means. And so, though matter is indeed one of the things that differentiates woman from man, since both are constituted by a union of body and soul, woman is, in an essential way, a woman, and man is, in an essential way, a man. Neither womanness nor manness reside merely in the matter of which persons are made, for both the body and the soul make us what we are. We are man and woman, as John Paul II states, both physically and ontologically. So sorry if that was torture for some of you, but we have to establish these facts before we can really have an intelligent conversation about what distinguishes men and women. First, we have to be very clear that this account is not disputing in any sense of the word the equality of men and women. In fact, what this account reveals is that men and women are absolutely equal, but it also reveals that which constitutes this equality. They are both composite creatures, differentiated by the matter of which they are made. And the point is, there is absolutely no risk to the equality of men and women in understanding their nature in this way. Woman and man are equal but different, a fact immediately discernible in human experience and accessible to scientific analysis. So here we find in Scripture the proof, and this is what's kind of important for this audience. Neither the male nor the female of the species can be considered normative for the species. Its significance is revealed when we realize that this means that women do not have to act like men to be considered human, and men do not have to act like women to be considered such. We have two equally human but differentiated ways of being in the world. Okay? Any questions? I guess you get to do that later. So this is a rather foreshortened analysis of Genesis 1 and 2, but it does establish both the equality of men and women and their difference. There is more, however, to be found in these texts. Considered together, Genesis 1 and 2 illuminate more fully the meaning of the second creation account and its significance for our question here. In Genesis 1, the sacred author seems to lay out a particular hierarchical order in which God creates. God begins with the heaven and the earth, then light. He then divides the waters, then creates dry land, vegetation day and night. He creates swarming creatures. There's sea monsters are in there somewhere. And this all culminates in the creation of Adam, human nature created male and female. This is clearly a hierarchy that is on its way up, from lower life forms to higher. In the second account, we read at 2:7 that a particular man is made from the dust of the earth. When at Genesis 2:18, God sees that Adam is alone, God forms every creature and brings them to Adam to be named. Then God, realizing that none of the creatures correspond to Adam's own being and that it is not good for Adam to be alone, decides it is necessary to make a fitting helper. The words are ezer kenegdo for him, then puts him into a deep sleep and forms the woman. Adam says, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." As John Paul II points out, Adam recognizes in Eve another person, a being equal to himself, a someone, not a something, a someone he can love, to whom he can make of himself a gift, and who can reciprocate in kind. This seems fairly straightforward. But there are several additional and important points to glean from considering these two chapters together. First, only when we come to the making of Eve do we see the final significance of the order introduced in the first account and brought to completion in the second. Adam is made from the earth, but Eve is made from Adam. Though it has perhaps quite rightly troubled feminists forever and is arguably the root of the historical misinterpretation of this passage, the fact that Eve is created second is not to make her subservient. She is, in fact, made on the way up. The last creature to appear, a creature made not from earth, but from Adam. That is, something that arguably already contains a greater degree of actualization than dust or clay. It does seem as though she is made of finer stuff. So there's a hierarchy. Can you see it? It starts with, monsters and creepy things, and finally, well, it doesn't start there, but you know what I'm saying. There's a hierarchy from lower life forms to higher, and Eve isn't created second, she's created last on the way up. I don't know why that didn't come up before. This proposition, okay, so Eve can be seen as the pinnacle of creation. We've talked about it that way before, have we not? Not as a creature whose place in that order is subservient or somehow less in stature than that of Adam. This proposition is reinforced when we consider that the Hebrew word usually translated as helper is ezer, which does not mean servant or slave. A different word would have been used if that was the intent. When this word is used elsewhere in Scripture, it has the connotation of divine aid. It's used in the Psalms. Used here to express helper or partner, it indicates someone who is most definitely not a slave or even remotely subservient. There is a sense of an equal, a partner, help sent by God. But it is essential to note the full text because it is ezer kenegdo. Kenegdo is a preposition that means in front of, in the sight of, or before, in the spatial sense. Thus, Eve is not to be his servant. A different word would have been used there, as I said, but someone who can help him to live. And Eve is not below Adam in the order of creation, but neither is she above him. She stands in front of him, before him, meeting his gaze, as it were, and sharing in the responsibility for the preservation of all that precedes them. After all, at Genesis 1:27, both male and female are given the command to subdue the earth and fill it. Thus, woman and man are equal, and both constitute the other for each other. Eve's place in the order of creation reveals her true nature and mission, that is, of help sent by God. And thus is another misunderstood element in the tradition, that woman is somehow subservient to man, sent to be merely his slave, set right. Okay. So, on to the genius question. And by the way, I would argue that JP2 uses the word genius as more of a rhetorical device. I think a better word might be charism. That's a word that's familiar in the tradition. I'm not sure where the genius resides. So, but it still was, it got our attention, right? So the preceding analysis allows us to derive something significant and quite distinct about the genius attributable to both men and women. First, it is notable that Adam is apparently in the garden alone with God for some period before the appearance of Eve, something that will bear further scrutiny in terms of the implications it has for the place man occupies in the created order and the traditional understanding of man as the head of the household. But the claim that I would like to make here is that aside from that special relationship with the Creator, it can be said that Adam's first contact with reality is one of loneliness. For his is a horizon that otherwise contains only lower creatures, what we might call things. It is this fact that leads God to conclude that Adam is alone, right? And ultimately leads to the building of Eve. And we will see here shortly that the fact that Adam's initial horizon includes only things has significance for the question of what might constitute the genius or charism of men. It does provide a point of departure in Scripture for the well-documented evidence, both scientific and phenomenological, and expressed by John Paul II, that men seem more naturally oriented toward things than toward persons. We will come back to that in a moment. In contrast, and of special significance, is the quite legitimate claim that since Eve comes into existence after Adam, her first contact with reality is of a horizon that from the beginning includes him. That is, it includes persons. One can imagine Eve, a person also endowed with intellect and free will, who upon seeing Adam would also recognize another like her, an equal, while the other creatures and things around her appear only on the periphery of her gaze. This exegetical insight seems to provide a starting place in Scripture for the equally well-documented phenomenon that women seem more naturally oriented toward persons. In Mulieris Dignitatem, John Paul argues that the feminine genius is grounded in the fact that all women have the capacity to be mothers, and that this capacity, whether fulfilled in a physical or spiritual sense, orients her toward the other, toward persons. I agree with that, and I have plenty of evidence to demonstrate it. And in every sense, Eve is certainly the mother of all humankind. But my point is that in addition to her capacity to conceive and nurture human life, indeed prior to it, her place in the order of creation reveals that from the beginning, the horizon of all womankind includes persons, includes the other. This may explain why girls and women seem to know from the beginning that they are meant for relationship, while it takes men a bit longer to look up. At least this was my experience. Maybe it's changed. It takes men a bit longer to look up and realize they are lonely for something they only just realized was missing, and look around for the one who can fill the void. And so here we are, finally, at the question of the genius of man. To grasp what might constitute man's genius, we would have to return once again to the opening chapters of Genesis. And time constraints do not permit a step-by-step exegesis, and so I will have to rely again on your good faith a bit as I make some claims about passages in Genesis 2 through 23 that I can only refer to here. They reveal several important things about the masculine genius. First, although we have already established that woman does not occupy a subservient role simply because she comes into existence after him, man is clearly first in the order of creation. He is first to know God, and when woman is brought to him, both the man and the Lord God recognize her for who she is, a person and his partner. The man's prior relationship with God prepares him in a special way to introduce the woman to God and to the things of creation. Perhaps the origin of man's role in the family can be traced to this fact, as well as to the revelation is herself created out of man. In a sense, man provides the material for the generation of woman, and it could be said thus establishes his place as the active or generative principle. But the heart of my hypothesis concerning the masculine genius is found in Genesis 15 through 23. Here we learn that man's place is in the midst of the created order, and further, that his task is to care for it. He is put in the garden to till it before the fall. Though it is not insignificant that in the first account both woman and man are instructed to fill the earth and subdue it, to have dominion over the earth, only Ish, only Adam, is given a specific task. And man's task is to work, to care for the things found in God's creation. Like the young man said, we like to fix things. This becomes more evident when we consider that as God searches for a partner for the man, he brings to him all the things of creation to see what he will name them. One by one, the man gives each a name. That is, he takes dominion over them. That's what naming things does in the Hebrew worldview. In order to name things well and have dominion over them, man, the original man, would have had to gain some kind of direct knowledge of them and to possess a certain familiarity and sophistication with things. For those familiar with the Thomist account of abstraction, and I'm looking at you guys, as a means of knowing universal natures, you know what an amazing feat this would have been. To see into the reality of things and know what they are. This is his gift. Indeed, St. Thomas Aquinas argues in the Summa that at this point Adam received an additional preternatural gift, a distinct form of infused knowledge in order to be able to name all the animals brought before him. And it is here that we come to the core of what I propose is man's genius. He learns that he excels at discovering what things are, how they are to be distinguished from one another, and what they are for. This is his gift. Perhaps Professor Anthony Estlin has said it best. Professor Estlin admits he doesn't really have a theory about all this, but he points out that without this literal discernment, that is, the clear separation of what may be predicated of a thing and what may not, with a systematic means for judging the matter, there can be nothing so intricate as law, the government of a city, higher learning, a church, not to mention philosophy and theology. Again, this is man's gift, his charism. He understands things. From this account, we are at least justified in at least proposing that man's capacity to name things, that is, as Estlin describes, his ability to determine what can be said of something and what cannot be said of it, and an ability to arrive at a systematic way of judging the matter, might be the gifts, be said to be the gifts men bring to the tasks of human living. When considered along with the fact that man's mission is to work in the garden, to care for God's creation, we are able to draw a further conclusion, that the genius of man is found in his capacity to know and to use the goods of the earth in the service of authentic human flourishing. Now, I hasten to point out that women is endowed with intellect, will, and freedom also, and I have argued elsewhere that she also has the capacity to abstract and to utilize her reason. Woman's rationality is the same as man's, but she attends to different things. So the phantasms that she would be working with would sort of orient her toward knowledge of different things than men. Doesn't mean I can't learn how to use a screwdriver. I know how to use a screwdriver. I don't always know the difference between the screwdrivers, but okay. Sorry, there haven't been many jokes, so I thought I'd better give one. Three further points. I'm sorry, this is kind of serious business for me. I am trying to save the world, you know. 3 further points must be made in this regard about men. We're done with the women thing. First, it is equally important to point out that the first man's capacity to know and use things does not mean that he is only oriented toward things. In truth, his first contact with reality includes the Lord God. He is, in the first instance, aware of his dependence upon his Creator, and he is truly marked by that relationship forever after. It is within this context that he encounters the woman. Until the woman is brought to him, both to name and to love as he can love no other, he names her too, you know. He has no other like himself. He knows immediately that the woman is not a thing. She is a person. Without hesitation, he declares that she is, at last, flesh of my flesh, bone of my bones. And while he can and does name her, he cannot have, he knows this, he cannot have dominion over her in the same way he has over everything else. She represents for him his highest good, the greatest gift God has given him, and as a consequence, the value of all the rest of creation is abrogated. From and through his encounter with the woman, the Lord God reveals to him the nature of the reciprocal relationship of the gift of self. And he must realize as well that his own gift, that of caring for and using the goods of creation, is a gift to be exercised in service to her authentic good. Secondly, man's prior relationship with the Lord God and his sophistication with things reveals something rather important about the fall. In relation to man, woman is rather unsophisticated about things. She has heard that they are not to eat of the tree at the center of the garden, but it was man who heard it directly from God. And it is worth noting that man appears to be more or less at her side at the critical moment of decision at Genesis 3:6, something that gets overlooked rather often. The one man I heard say after the fall, Adam says to God, "Yes, and the woman you gave me made me do it." It is in this passage that we see man fail in what will be an essential element of his charism. It was said by a number of students, man as protector. He knows firsthand what God has instructed. He has superior knowledge of things, at least at this moment in the narrative. The serpent has approached the woman because he suspects she will have influence over the man. And of course we know what happens next. But man's guilt in the fall is thus exposed. His mission is to ensure that the goods of creation are used for woman's good. He failed to exercise dominion over creation at a critical moment in salvation history. Last, the rather well-documented proclivity of men to attend more to things than to persons is often criticized, in many cases legitimately so, distorted as it can be by the effects of original sin. And when we talked about the little babies, that boys look at things and girls at faces, and if you talk to a boy, it doesn't really matter, and we all laughed. Remember that part? In fact, this is an indication of man's charism. Because I maintain that we are justified in seeing it as a reflection of man's genius once it is established that it is in virtue of this gift that man contributes to the good of humankind. But a further proposition is required to support this claim. We must recall that the goods of creation, like persons, have ontological status also. They're created by God, held in existence by God, endowed with a telos that orders them toward a final end according to God's design. Thus, though the constant moral context of all human action is found in the fact that the highest value is and always will be the authentic good of human persons, man's orientation toward things is also an orientation toward creatures. In fact, it is this orientation that makes him most properly their steward. Properly understood, The particular genius of man has proven throughout history to be an essential gift in sustaining families and creating social order. Indeed, it has been the key to the very building up of civilizations. Of all the creatures in the material world, humans are the only ones who actually have to work to master their environment and create conditions that support human flourishing. Without the specific genius of man, the human species would not have survived. Do you hear that, guys? Without you, we would not be here in this nicely heated building. I would not have the job I've got. Are we clear? Are we clear? That's a Jack Nicholson line. Even radical feminist Camille Paglia stated recently that if it weren't for men, I love this quote, we would still be living in grass huts. We owe men a debt of gratitude, even if we must also remember that all of us, man and woman alike, are forever under the sway of the effects of original sin. It is the logic of sin that confuses us, that needs to be broken, to quote Pope Benedict, so that a way forward can be found that is capable of banishing it from the hearts of sinful humanity. As our faith reveals, self-knowledge is an important weapon in our constant battle with the forces that seek to defeat us. To understand the masculine genius in this way is to equip man with the knowledge he needs to strengthen his own struggle with the effects of original sin, which now can be seen in a new light. And so far, all of this is in reference to what John Paul II terms the state of original innocence. So let's bring this to a close with a few remarks about the fall. The story of the fall does seem to indicate, in a sort of backwards way, that the interpretation of Genesis we've been considering has some merit. Because the account of the fall at Genesis 3 makes manifestly clear that the man and the woman will suffer differently as a result of their sin. The woman will endure greater pain in childbirth. Nonetheless, her yearning will be for her husband, who will, in spite of her desire, lord it over her. The man will now struggle with creation. Those things he named as his own in Genesis 2 will now only yield their fruits with suffering and toil. The place both had occupied in the state of original innocence has now been turned upside down. In light of the previous analysis, this can only mean that instead of somehow occupying a place of honor, while nonetheless his equal, woman will now be dominated by the man. As for man, instead of occupying the place of secure and confident steward of God's creation, he will now have to fight with it. The effects of original sin will, and clearly do, manifest quite differently in men and in women. Perhaps it seems clear that original sin can be said to affect man in particular in his tendency toward a disordered relationship to things. He tends to use women as objects, right? Not any of you guys, all those guys out there, right? Those people we read about in the paper, on MTV and stuff, from what I've heard. Man's struggle is with creation itself. This manifests for some men in a compulsion for work and acquisition that leads them then to forget themselves and their true meaning. I have a husband that absolutely every single night I have to call in from the garage for dinner, right? I'll be right there. I guess not many of you are married yet, but just wait. Eve's punishment would lead to a distortion of her own natural gift, that of attending to the person and the capacity for relationship. She is told that her desire will be for her husband, even in light of the pain of childbirth. And here, husband should not be taken too literally. It is necessary to interpret this in light of our contemporary context. Certainly it can be said that women now often manifest a disordered inclination in relationships. The confusion in relationships between men and women that has manifested over the last 50 years is well documented. It is often the case for many women that their desire is for the other even when he treats her as an object, even when he dominates and uses her. John Paul II says in the Theology of the Body that men use women, but women use men, because women are seeking someone to whom they can give themselves. This is what they're looking for, right? So it's, we're all in the soup. And last, the age-old question of why the serpent approached Eve first with his temptation needs to be taken up anew. There have been only a few interpretations of this, mostly variations on the same theme, that Eve, being weaker and more vulnerable, was the easiest prey. But if I have shown that Eve is Adam's equal in that she is fully human and therefore endowed with a rational soul and the powers of intellect, will, and freedom, we are no longer able to hold to that position. Eve is most certainly innocent, but she is not irrational. However, she is at a disadvantage. She knows little about the world of things, whereas Adam's relationship to the things of the garden is much more sophisticated. He had named them. He knew God much more intimately than did Eve. And so, yes, Eve was easy prey. But Eve was sent to Adam as a kind of divine aid. She is Adam's equal while somehow occupying pride of place in the created order. In approaching Eve, the serpent is executing a very clever strategy. His intent is to corrupt the entire hierarchy of creation, and so he begins, so to speak, at the top. He knows that if he can get to Eve, he will soon have Adam. As John Paul tells us, Eve is the first in the order of love. She was sent to safeguard Adam's heart. Eve was the greatest point of leverage, because it was and still is her responsibility to turn toward the other, to keep man focused on the end toward which his work is ordered, the flourishing of human persons. And when woman loses her place, when she is corrupted, so is the family, so is the culture, the nation, and the world. At the same time, Adam also had a job to do. As I have already pointed out, he was first in the order of creation. His horizon included a greater grasp of the created order and the way it came to be. He was on intimate terms with the Creator. His task is to be the first line of defense against the serpent, to protect Eve from the threats to her person, and he failed her. Is that not so even today? Though many of us will deny it, women are in very great need of protection now. They have lost their way in large measure, and so men have as well. In this regard, it is fitting to end by considering here the effect that Christ's redemptive act needs to have on these realities, and to point, with the Holy Father, to Mary as the prototype of the feminine genius, the model that women are to follow in pursuing their own vocation. I have written elsewhere that for men, the fitting prototype is most definitely Saint Joseph. The implications of this should be made explicit. But taking our clue from St. John Paul II, what this means is that both the feminine genius and the masculine genius, while it begins as a potency in nature, it is one that can, it's one that can certainly be actuated, observed, and spoken about on that level. But in truth, it is actually a supernatural reality. If Mary's the prototype, you can be sure that grace is involved. So it is actually a supernatural reality that, if we are to realize it fully, requires both man and woman to enter into the life of grace and to be sustained by it, if we are to arrive at that level that represents a more perfected state. It is one thing to laugh about the fact that I can remember where my husband left his glasses or his keys, and I do, or to feel a sense of superiority when it is clear that I seem better equipped to multitask. And I do. Or complain that women seem to complicate things. This is you guys. And we do. And why are they always taking things so personally anyway? And we do. But it is another thing entirely to exercise the virtue of charity in the home or in the public arena, which, let us admit, often requires nothing less than a supernatural act. To share in the royal dominion we both are called to exercise over the life of the family and the world. Really quick, I'll tell you this story. My husband and I had an argument, a rare argument one night. And he goes, you know, what you have to remember is that I'm the king around here. And I said, I was so proud of myself, I said right back, that's quite all right, honey, because I'm the queen. And that's how it is. We need to remember, we're royalty. We've been baptized into the threefold office of Christ. We need to behave like the aristocracy, right? This is what we tell our daughter. She's a princess, I'm the queen, daddy's the king. It works out really well. And kings and queens talk to each other in a certain way. Yeah, I think. I don't know. At least they used to. Or in all those stories, Charlemagne and stuff, I don't know. Okay. So the last point, I'll repeat this, the last point I'll make. From our complementarity issues our mission to create not only human families, but human history itself. Thank you for your kind attention.
Wow, so much awesome stuff. So good. If you guys had a lot of questions or comments or thoughts and just kind of stewing over some of that, we're going to have a chance for questions later, so sit tight. But before that, we are going to hear a response from Dr. Deavel, and Dr. Deavel is an associate editor of Logos, a journal of Catholic thought and culture, and he's an adjunct professor of Catholic studies. He received his BA from Calvin College in philosophy and English, and his MA and PhD from Fordham University in historical theology. He is a board member for the Newman Association of America and a contributing editor of Gilbert, the magazine of the American Chesterton Society. His articles, essays, and reviews have appeared in a variety of academic and public journals, including America, Catholic World Report, Commonweal, First Things, Journal of Markets and Morality, Minneapolis Star Tribune, National Review, Nova et Vetera, and Touchstone. He lives in St. Paul with his wife, Catherine, a philosophy professor at UST, and their 6 children. So, without further ado, please welcome up Dr. David Deavel.
First of all, let me thank the Siena Symposium and the Edge for inviting me here to give a response. I was really excited when I saw the signs because it said, is there a masculine genius? And then at the bottom it said, Dr. Deborah Savage and Dr. David Deavel. And I thought, she's a woman. It's got to be me, right? That wasn't what they wanted, though. That's right. I'm getting a medal, aren't I? No, after hearing Dr. Savage's talk, I think I know who the genius is. But what I want to do is talk a little bit about what I think is right about what she's doing, and to add a little bit to it by considering a few other things. I have 5 boys and 1 girl, and I think that it's very important now, as always, to think about the differences between men and women and what kind of God-given gifts we have as men and women. Now, while many thinkers are still worried about the status of women and the furthering and unleashing of their own particular genius, it seems that in the West, at least, the sex that has the most difficulty is men. And Dr. Savage aptly quoted Meg Meeker's line that men were the casualties in the feminist revolution. She also noted the higher frequency of drug use, suicide attempts, dropping out of high school, etc. Now, given that ours is an age of statistics, let me add a few more little numerical bits on those statements that have been taken from U.S. Census data and are available on a really well-done document called For Every 100 Girls. If you Google this, it's very illuminating, about 6 or 7 pages worth of statistics. And each of them starts for every 100 girls, and I'll just read a few of them. For every 100 12th grade girls who carried a weapon on school property, 276 boys carried a weapon. For every 100 12th grade girls who were threatened or injured with a weapon on school property, 175 boys were threatened or injured. For every 100 12th grade girls who engaged in a physical fight on school property, 276 boys. For every 100 females ages 15 to 19 that commit suicide, 549 males in the same age range will do this. For every 100 females ages 20 through 24 that commit suicide, 624 males of the same age kill themselves. For every 100 girls ages 15 to 17 in correctional facilities, this is 15 to 17, mind you, 837 boys are behind bars. For every 100 women ages 18 through 21, 1,430 men behind bars. And in the ages of 22 to 24, there are 1,448 men for every 100 women in correctional facilities. And I think these statistics are particularly jarring, and they ought, I think, to focus discussion away slightly from an exclusive attention to certain disparities in various fields of work and in upper levels of management and politics that are dominated by men that some think imply that there's a glass ceiling, to a more balanced look at the status of men who seem to have a glass floor that they can't even get through. I don't think you have to subscribe to the philosopher Christina Hoff Sommers' idea that there is a conscious war on women, or war on boys, to see that really boys really have been the casualties. Dr. Savage mentioned college attendance. I think this is a subject that's little known, but if you've ever worked in admissions or with admissions, you'll know that affirmative action in colleges works primarily for the advantage of getting more boys to college. In the For Every 100 Girls list, college attendance has, for every 100 girls in a first-year college program, 84 boys are there. It dips to 81 by the 4th year. You go on to master's degrees, PhD degrees, boys and men are lagging behind. And of course, schools that can't get enough men to enroll then start to lose women too, because women don't necessarily want to be at all women's schools unless they've chosen one. Given these numbers, of course, it's very difficult to find men to divvy up among all these colleges. So I think it's an important moment for thinking about the masculine genius specifically. And I thank Dr. Savage for advancing the discussion using these particularly powerful resources of contemporary scientific research, which is often unknown, Scripture, and the thought of our late philosopher Pope, St. John Paul II. Now, I want to briefly highlight what I think is particularly helpful in her presentation, and then second, outline what I think is a complementary framework for thinking about the masculine and feminine geniuses, or is it genii? I'm never quite sure what the plural we're supposed to use, the Latinate or not. But it's a framework that's found in the writings of the 20th century English writer G.K. Chesterton, who lived from 1874 to 1936. Let's start with Dr. Savage. Now, what I think is most important in her work is the overturning of certain understandings of the biblical and Catholic Christian narrative by explaining them properly. And the first example is the interpretation of Eve's creation out of the rib of Adam in Genesis 2. While this has often been seen as degrading, Dr. Savage notes that this means that she is a creation out of finer stuff, and in many ways, the pinnacle of creation. Now, while some feminist thinkers took themselves to be upending the biblical narrative, the reality is close enough to the old joke. Why was Eve created after Adam? Because even God needs a rough draft. It makes the joke a little bit orthodox and staid. So you can tell your feminist friends this. Of course, anybody who took seriously the notion that Mary is, as Hopkins put it, merely a woman, yet whose presence, power is, great as no goddesses, was deemed, dreamed, would probably have seen this rather mystical reality. I know Dr. Savage wants to emphasize the equality, but I do think there is something that's very interesting about this. Chesterton himself said that men might be men, but man is a woman. It's a receptive element to all of us. But you can see this with Mary. Her supremacy in the new creation, she's the queen of heaven. It's a kind of acknowledgement of a kind of supremacy of Eve's in the old creation. Now, her second gift to us, Dr. Savage, not Mary, is in framing the two kinds of genius in a way that wisely combines a little bit of the old with a little bit of the new. Now, thinkers like the late French theologian Louis Bouillet often drew up the distinction between masculine and feminine as that precisely between active and receptive. They were sort of principles that we stood for. Now, Dr. Savage has done something a little bit different. She has acknowledged that both of us have active and receptive elements to us, and man is to be a sort of active principle, or he's distinguished by his activity, but woman is not receptive primarily in her framework, but instead is a helper. Not the helper in the sense of assistant to the regional manager, Adam, but helper as in the way God is our help, the one who sustains us. I've often thought it's very interesting and not commented often enough that for men are protectors, in their strength. But all men start out just like women do, being cared for by women, and in their limit situations are cared for by women, and at the end of their lives are cared for by women. Really, the help in the way that God is, present at the beginning and the end. Not always the same women. But I do think that receptivity is not such a bad way to think of women. After all, women can be sustainers because they are so receptive to the grace of God. Dr. Savage mentioned multitasking. Women seem to be receptive to a whole range of things that men just really don't pay attention to because the TV is on. But I think this is really helpful, the way she's framed it, in part because when people bring out the active-receptive dialectic, many people say, oh, receptivity, that just means passivity. Women are just passive. And it doesn't mean that, but it's nice to have a different kind of framework. Now, Dr. Savage doesn't shy away from saying that part of man's genius is to embody that active principle, that principle of action. And I think this is important. And the activity that men are called to first and foremost, she notes, is knowledge of God. It's knowing God. Even if women are more receptive, men are supposed to be responding in a different sort of way. And what that's supposed to lead them to is then a sort of secondary characteristic of activity, which is a sort of searching knowledge, what she describes as discovering what things are, how they are to be distinguished from one another, and what they are for. And she goes on to propose that the capacity to name things, to determine what can be predicated of something, and what can't be predicated and what can, and an ability to arrive at a systematic way of judging the matter, are the gifts that man brings to human life. And insofar as man understands things, his gift is thus to be a protector, in the sense primarily that he has a gift for determining how goods are to be used for the benefit of all others. I think in all of these formulations, Dr. Savage has rightly pointed out something that is very true about man's nature, and for individual men, I think makes them happy. They like to be fixing things and solving problems. That, of course, has its limits, but it is something that is a rightly ordered gift. Now, it's here where I wish to introduce G.K. Chesterton's very complimentary phrasings. When I originally read her essay a month or two ago, I thought very much of G.K. Chesterton's 1910 work, What's Wrong with the World? And he has two sections in there, one called Imperialism, or the Mistake About Man, and then Feminism, or the Mistake About Woman. And the imperialism section is not as useful for our purposes, but it has a few little things in it. But it's the kind of unscientific witness that Dr. Savage's mother would give, something that somebody who has observed the world and observed society for a long time can give. And he had a great imagination, so I think he gives us a neat picture of what are the particular geniuses. Now, Dr. Savage detected that interest in things in the scientific research as well as in the crib. And Chesterton noted of men that they had that ability to focus on the thing. He spoke of it in the context, actually, of persons coming together. He said, when men get together, they speak to the subject. Women tend to speak to the person. Dr. Savage wanted us all to say hello to her. Come on, just talk. That's what men say, right? We're talking about the subject here. He says, many an honest man has sat in a ring of his 5 best friends, and note that men always have 5 best friends, or at least 3 or 4. We can't talk one-on-one. That's silly. His 5 best friends under heaven, and forgotten who was in the room while he explained some system. This is not peculiar to intellectual men. Men are all theoretical, whether they are talking about God or about golf. Men are all impersonal, that is to say, Republican, small r. No one remembers after a really good talk who has said the good things. Every man speaks to a visionary multitude, a mystical cloud that is called the club, and that's why I'm looking up. Men are impersonal, they speak to the subject. Men are particularly good, says Chesterton, because of this, at a vision of equality, and that's what he means by them being Republican, small r. They're focused on the subject at hand. They treat men, he says, as comrades. Comrades are all in the same boat, and they're to be treated by the same rules. They don't even have to know each other's names. They just have to know what's going on and what the rules are. I go off and play basketball with somebody at the park, and my wife says, well, who was it? Some dudes. We played basketball. For that reason, though, that treatment of equality, they can often be consistent to a fault. Women, on the other hand, says Chesterton, are trimmers. They trim the rules to benefit the weaker side because they don't see the equality but the individuality and thus the inequality in others. In a sense, says Chesterton, women don't even really have rules, and I think he means hard and fast rules. Since women see each and everything, each and every one, in its own specificity. Now, seeing people in all their many splendored strength, mediocrity, and weakness means that women attain to a sort of universality that men do not attain to. While men are good at the systematic side of things, this means that they focus on the use of the systems at hand. They are, says Chesterton, the embodiment of cleverness, while women are the embodiment of wisdom. Because since nobody can be clever at all things, know all systems well, men toward specialization, while women tend toward universality. He says the jack of all trades is to be found occasionally, but it's usually a Jill of all trades. The man is represented by gadgets, which do some specific and really cool thing. Women, on the other hand, are represented by such universal symbols as the fire, the stick, the hearth. You can do anything with a fire. And men love to start fires, don't get me wrong. But women are symbolized by the fire, by the stick, the hearth. And while men are expected, not least by themselves, but by others, to give their best, women are tasked with giving, he says, their all. Women who ordinarily take care of children know that they're expected to be a little bit of everything to a child. They don't just teach the child the rule of 3, but they teach the child everything. Chesterton doesn't say that this assignment of tasks is simply an instinct that we have. Instead, he says it's been assigned by civilization in its wisdom. Civilization has seen the utility of this division of tasks because of the relationship of women to their children, and indeed women to all people. Now, since Dr. Savage has introduced some studies in her favor, I might add that recent studies in the UK and elsewhere suggest that civilization's instinct was, if not according to the scientific method, at least scientific. It's not just Deborah who is good at multitasking, but according to scientists at the universities of Durham and Leeds, women are better at multitasking. They had 120 men and 120 women do two different tasks. When they got to do them in order, men and women did fine on both of them. When they had to do them at the same time and mixed up two different tasks, men were significantly slower at getting this done. I think this might suggest why women are drawn toward care of human beings at much greater rates than men are. They don't just see persons, but they're actually better at taking care of the multiple needs that persons have in a holistic way. Women do keep the home fires burning even when they're at work. Now, as a counterpoint, in large group situations, men's impersonal nature and attention to the subject or the project may make them able to create a more comradely environment. One of the gentlemen on the movie said that men are good at leadership, and I think there's something to that. Chesterton says that comradeship is that province of men and not of women. There's a certain equality that's assumed. Again, with some interesting statistics. For over 60 years, the polling firm Gallup has asked whether people prefer men or women as bosses. And as you might guess, most people don't really give an answer to this because they realize that men and women are both equally good at being tyrants or being great bosses. But significantly, for those who do express a preference, it's women and not men who are likely to express a preference for a male boss. Last year by 39% to 26%. Never in 60 years have women preferred a woman boss over a man. Now, the study doesn't say why they prefer one or the other, but I think what Chesterton says is quite suggestive of this. Now, of course, to say all these things is not to say that individual men cannot embody wisdom or the care of the individual or the universal. And I say this as a man who has spent much of the last decade taking a lot of time to care for my own children, doing the laundry, the dishes, paying the bills. What does that say? 1. Oh, yeah, I'm almost there. Sorry, I was focusing on this. I can't look up. Nor is it the case that women cannot be clever or specialists or even good bosses. And I've had some good ones in my day, including the one who's at home watching the kids. The questions of masculine or feminine genius do not always lead to clear-cut roles in the home or the marketplace, but they do show us something about where, and particularly how, men and women can thrive and serve humanity wherever they are. Genius of any sort will find its perfection in myriad ways and in myriad roles. But to say that there's a masculine or feminine genius and then to identify it in some way is to help men and women discover the ways that they can develop themselves. And then, and I think it's important to say this, it's through prayer and discipline manifest that feminine or masculine genius. It's not as if, well, I have this genius and now it's going to be sort of spread out over you. We have to make it work. And that is a process which Dr. Savage noted really is something that needs grace as well as a perfection of nature. And when we do that, we can be as men and women, as Scripture says, like gold refined. So thank you very much.
All right, we've got a couple minutes for Q&A, so you can actually just stay seated. We have people running with the microphones so they'll spot you and they'll bring you a microphone. And please direct your question either at Dr. Savage or Dr. Deavel or both. Great.
This is for either or both of you. There's commonly a distinction drawn between sex of a person and gender, and saying that that sex is automatic, inherent biologically, and gender is completely invented, created. Any comments on that?
You know, my wife has come up with this term, and I like to use it, is that, you know, we have a sex-inclusive concept of gender. You know, that seems like an odd phrasing, but most people, or at least a lot of people in the public eye these days, want to say that gender is this completely different thing from your biology. And I think, you know, you got some of the tools from Dr. Savage for thinking about this more clearly, that being masculine or feminine is a proper accident of us. It's not something like being red hair. A lot of people talk about it as if it's plumbing. You know, do you have to sit down or stand up to go to the bathroom? Well, that's all it really is. Well, no, that's not all it really is. It is a real thing. But I think coming up with a, you know, clever term sometimes is the first way to sort of get things reintroduced into the discussion. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I would add that Sister Prudence Allen argues that we need to keep the word gender, and sex-inclusive notion of gender is a good way to. I like that a lot. But she says points out that the word gender comes from the same origin as the word generation, and if we let the culture take that word, we're giving up a lot more than just. We're not giving up something small. And so I think we need to maintain a connection with that word and have it mean what it does. I mean, as I understand it, there's like 50 different genders you can be if you sign up for Facebook. Is that correct? Something like that. This is not normal. This doesn't correspond to anything in reality, you know. So I think. I guess I use the word sex mostly instead of gender, just out of habit, I suppose. But I thought you should know that anyway. She's an expert in the area, really, and that's what she says. So.
Thank you so much. This question is directed towards Dr. Savage. You spoke about Aquinas' theory about like the intermingling of soul and body, the commensuration.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if you could give some thoughts about how that might affect how like men and women pray differently or relate to God differently, if at all.
Huh. Well, that's interesting because it lets me say something back to Dr. Deavel just for a second. And that is that I don't know.
She took it personally.
No. Yes, I did. No. I think men embody the active principle and women embody the receptive principle. That's for sure. That's in my Nature of Woman in Relation to Man paper. So maybe it wasn't so clear in this one, but I'll have to look at that. But what's interesting to me about the Genesis account is that it shows that human being is characterized by both activity and receptivity. It's like because, and the way I derive it in the longer paper, you know, you'll have to read it when it comes out, is to point out that which is in the effect must first be in the cause. So how could there be two distinct principles in the second account without there having been the origin of that has to be somewhere. So okay, so it's in man per se. It must be in man per se, right? So how is that? Well, what I argue is that man per se is a composite of body and soul, and that the soul is active in relation to the body, and the body is receptive in relation, and the soul is active in relation to the body and receptive in relation to God. So the soul itself, that which makes me what I am, is characterized by both these principles. Okay. So what does this mean for your question? Well, it means that men and women are both equally, in a certain sense anyway, receptive and equally active in relation to one's inner life at least, or the life of prayer, grace. We're receptive of grace, right? And In fact, I started to think about this question when a priest I really admire came to ask me, because some of the men he was teaching at the seminary were having questions about, you know, receptivity, isn't that a woman's thing, and blah, 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 you know. And so that was why I started to think about that in connection with that very thing. I think women are really the receptive principle, that they do have a deeper, a purer potency in a certain way with regard to that, perhaps, but I would hesitate to go too far with that, because as Mother Teresa says, we're all called to be holy. Yeah. So I don't mean to go on and on, but Pope Francis saying that we need a theology of women, I could not disagree more. My paper on the masculine genius went to the Vatican, and I keep hoping to get a call from him. I do, because I want to say, Holy Father, I love you and everything, but because what would that mean? That women have a different way of getting to heaven than men do? I mean, maybe, you know, I remember when I got engaged realizing that if I would have the good fortune to have children, that sort of my route back to heaven was built into my very body. You know, I had these thoughts about it, but I think men and women, in an objective sense anyway, return to God, are free to use all the means available to all of us in our return back to God, and that we're equally equipped to realize that. I think there's a lot more to think about there, but that's all I'm prepared to say right now. Is that okay? Okay. I could say more, but I'd be making it up. Okay.
So we've got time for 2 more questions.
Which I do occasionally.
Hi. You, Dr. Savage, you mentioned earlier that gender is from birth. We're given gender at birth, not socialization. And I was wondering how intersex children fit into that idea, assuming that there's only 2 genders, but intersex folks have pieces of like each gender.
Do you mean hermaphrodites and things like that? Is that what you mean?
Intersex is like people with, let's see, I wrote it down. 5-alpha reductase deficiency, AIS, ambiguous genitalia.
What is their DNA?
Their DNA can be XX, XY.
Oh, okay. I haven't given much thought to that, so I guess I can't really say. I'm sorry, I can't. I don't want to make something up to that. That's an important question.
Okay, thank you.
Well, now just wait. Let me
Sorry.
Let me think. Give me a second here. The first thing I would say is that they're children of God. Right? They're humans, right? I mean, this seems even stupid to say, right? I mean, that would be self-evident, but so I guess your question is, what are they?
Is that what gender would you consider them to be? Like, which gender would they perform?
It sounds like, yeah, they're ambiguous. Is that right?
Yeah.
Dr. Deavel, perhaps you could.
I mean, I take it that they have sort of physical characteristics of both, and that's what we're talking about, right?
Right, and assuming that you perform whichever gender or sex that you were given at birth. So which would these children fall into?
Yeah.
Well, I think you're talking about an exceptional case, and I was talking about the norm. So, you know, we'd have to think further about how to include in my account a provision for that. But I have no sense of how often that happens or anything like that, so I'm sorry, can't really. Okay. But I appreciate the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
This is for both Dr. Deavel and Dr. Savage. Well, first of all, Dr. Savage, in your talk, you were talking about how it's like, I guess the casualty, like, of the war for women has been boys or men. And I guess the importance of having, like, a role model, boys not really having heroes or example of, like, that male genius.
Yeah.
I mean, in pop culture, you have, it's like everything from Red, Green to, it's like Philosopher Kings of Plato is, like, kind of exhibiting this. But it's like, what would be some good examples of heroes It was like, say I could give to my like 2-year-old nephew.
Oh. Do you know? I mean, would you have a ready answer for that?
Well, you know, I've thought about this quite a bit. I mean, we all love made-up heroes and superheroes, but I think that part of the reason why people have flocked, you know, to the Marvel universe to think about this is because so many people have downplayed what actual heroes in this life. I mean, there was a piece on Veterans Day by some guy in, I think it was USA Today, saying, you know, veterans are not heroes, firemen are not heroes, policemen are not heroes because some of them are bad people personally. And of course, that all may be true, but what we honor in heroes is stepping up to the plate in certain situations. Saints are, of course, heroes who step up to the plate all the time. And so I think what we need to do is think about saints as heroes. And ordinary people who step up to the plate all the time for their families and honor those. And I think we need to think about them, you know, not just public figures, but I think we need to see people in our neighborhood, in our parish, who've really done a great job of being protectors and providers. You know, not to say that you know we shouldn't look to soldiers and firemen and things like that. I think we should, but we look to a variety of heroes to hold up to our children.
Yeah, I would add to that just briefly. What about you? You know, I give talks on the virtues rather frequently, and I always ask this question: who do you know that has virtue, that's virtuous? And people will say, "Oh, Mother Teresa, John Paul II, you know, whatever." And then I'll point out to them that they probably are also. I mean, my father got up every single day, his entire life, to go to work and put food on the table for his family. If that isn't courage, I don't know what is. See? So as Dr. Deavel says, we tend to make it large, want to make it larger than life. And really the people that had the most impact on me were high school teachers and my father and some of the men I work with and teach at the seminary. Truly, don't tell them, but... So, I mean, it might go to their heads. So, you know, I think we're surrounded by people who are stepping up to that plate every single day, and we just don't notice them because we're thinking that heroism or virtue or whatever looks shiny. Yeah.
Let me add one more thing. My wife and I, when we do marriage prep things with the Archdiocese, like to point out that one of the best things that you can do when you're getting married, but I think you don't have to be married to do this, is to find people in your community who are older than you, who you admire, and hang out with them. Because that will help you, because you will have somebody who's a hero, you know, that you work with or whatnot. But then that provides then for your 2-year-old nephew or your child or whoever, somebody who's right there. You know, look at those people. They're what we want to be like.
Okay, so that's all we have time for. So yeah, we're just going to hear some closing remarks. So first, just some awesome questions. We have some dessert in the back for you guys to just continue this discussion and some of these conversations. But before we close, the students involved in the planning of this event wanted to share their thoughts and specifically bring a woman's perspective to all that we have heard tonight. So with that being said, here is Magdalene Lococo.
All right. As we wrap up tonight, after hearing some great reflections on men and their gifts, we wanted to share some encouragement and thoughts. As women, it is easy to get caught up in so many different things, such as that accounting assignment I have to turn in tomorrow, or the way he said that to me in the quad today, or what she meant by that text message, friendship complications, roommate issues, and why did he like that picture on my Facebook wall? The list goes on and on. While women have a genius for focusing on the specifics of life, men aren't as easily consumed by these daily occurrences. This is part of man's gift, and the unique perspective that they bring is needed in the world. Can you imagine if the world were solely driven by women and their tendency to get caught up in the details? Nothing would ever get done. The inherent ordering that men bring in conjunction with women's gift of seeing the whole person is necessary to the healthy functioning of the family and society as a whole. We hope that what you have heard tonight resonates and starts a dialogue that will encourage you to be more attentive to your role in the plan of creation, in the way that we were made as men and women. Men, we want you to know that we recognize your strength, and as women, we need that strength. When our group sat down to plan this event back in September, it was for a reason. We see a need for this message to be heard, shared, and lived. And so we say to you, men, do not be afraid to take what you have heard tonight and step out with courage to a world that needs what you have to give. As fathers, husbands, brothers, and sons, order creation and bring your strength to the places around you where you know it is needed most. Do the Father's will without counting the costs. We support you, and we recognize that these seeds of truth will not take root and grow overnight. Life is a journey, and we want you to know that just as Eve walked with Adam and Mary walked with Jesus as he carried his cross, so too do we walk with you in this journey to become who we were each made to be. Thank you.
Well, thank you to the women that contributed to writing that. That was awesome. Great. Well, I just want to thank you all so much for coming. Like I said, we have some desserts in the back, but first I'd like to take a minute to thank Dr. Savage and Dr. Deavel, both for your words tonight. Dr. Lemons, and for everyone involved in the Siena Symposium, thank you as well. In addition to the interns who volunteered to help us with a few last-minute details, we appreciate that. Lastly, stay posted for the next Catholic Edge, which will be in February. Yes, in February. Also, stay posted for the next Siena Symposium, which
April 16th.
Will be April 16th.
But there's also an argument club for women on February 3rd.
And there's an argument club for women on February 3rd.
To the 6th. I don't know what's
or the 6th.
It's on there's a flyer in the back, and it's on surrogacy. Surrogacy, compassion, or commodity.
And what is surrogacy, for those who might not be familiar with the term?
Oh, that's when a woman agrees to sell her womb for you so you can have a baby.
Okay, that should be...
More or less. I mean, that's sort of it. Yeah.
That should be very interesting.
It's a debate. It's a debate. It's edgy. It's really edgy.
Ooh, edgy. Okay. Well, that officially concludes the evening. So, thank you all for coming.